Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the CollegeXpress podcast. As always, I am joined today with Abby, Mackenzie, and our special guest today is Anthony. Anthony, if you can tell us what you do here at Carnegie Dartlet and also where you went to college.
I am a support specialist for the sales team, so I pretty much just work really closely with all the regional directors, the salespeople here, and I help them out with whatever they need. And I went to the University of Connecticut. Go Huskies.
All right, Huskies, baby. So we're going to be talking all about test prep today, so SAT, ACT, and we'll get right into it. So let's get this going. All right, so our first question today is, what can I do to make sure I finish the SAT/ACT within the time frame? So I think a few of the things that we want to keep in mind is that whenever you're going into a test, you want to practice the material as much as possible. So practice tests are extremely important. I'm sure you do it when you're going to go for a regular test at high school. And practice tests exist all over the place. You can even get tutors, which we're going to go into a little bit later, and different areas like on CollegeXpress.com. We have the SAT word game.
CollegeXpress.com.
CollegeXpress.com. But I think the biggest thing is take the time to take a practice test and see how much time it takes you, but also see how much time it takes you in the different sections. And then that way you can identify your weakness and really put time and effort into the areas that you're struggling with. And then that way you kind of know, you gauge better with where you are going and what your abilities currently are. And I think one of the biggest things is overrated or underrated is use common sense. When you're reading a question, don't overcomplicate things. Just read it, and what is your first gut reaction? Is it something that is simple and you should go for it? Don't get in your own head. A lot of the times you might be sitting there and you're like, okay, this is riding on how I get into college. Mm-hmm. So you might be overthinking things and struggling with that while you're taking the test, and I don't know about this, maybe I did it wrong. Mm-hmm. Go with your gut reaction, go with the first instinct. Usually you're going to feel pretty good about it. We'll get into the different sections a little bit later, but if you have the time to go back and double check when you have the time. Don't dwell on a question. Don't sit there.
Don't get bogged down in the details.
Yeah. And another really, really key thing, don't overstudy. Take the time to relax, do it in segments, take an hour, do whatever it is. Again, going back to the first point of taking the practice exam, take your practice exam and know where your weaknesses are, spend the time on those things, and don't overdo it, because if you keep doing it, you're going to get in your head, you're going to get stuck, you're going to hit a rut. Make sure you get some sleep. Mm-hmm. That's a huge, huge benefit to you and remembering things too. I don't know if you ever tried to run off of no sleep or very little sleep, but everything's a little foggy, and that could be a bad time. So
it's also like a 3-hour, 4-hour test, so it's a long time just sitting there, reading questions, answering questions. So want to get your sleep so you're able to sit there and focus, but also doing the practice tests will help you build that stamina to be able to do that, because I'm sure if you're taking a regular test in school, it's probably 40 minutes, like a regular class period. So you're not used to taking a long test like that. So you definitely want to practice with other tests and just do it a couple times, not just once.
I'd echo that. Practice tests are really the only way that you're going to know how it feels to be sitting through that much time of just straight up thinking and answering questions. So definitely do a practice test. And I think kind of in the same vein as not getting bogged down in the details is feel free to skip a question and come back to it. Yeah. If you are just, stalling on this one question, it's the clock just keeps ticking. So you're going to have to just come back to it, or, worst case scenario, you leave it blank rather than putting something incorrectly or spending all the time trying to figure it out when you have a lot of other questions to answer.
That's actually, I don't know if any of you guys know, but when I took the SAT way back when, if you got the answer wrong, it was worth
Yeah. That's why, and I honestly didn't want to say it because I wasn't sure if that was still true.
I heard that
you don't lose points.
You don't lose
points?
points?
Yeah, I think nowadays you want to leave it empty if you don't know.
Okay.
No, I don't think you do. I don't think
You
you lose
don't?
points now. I think you get 0 for wrong answers and 0 for if you leave it blank.
I think that's the new style.
So-
Oh, that's weird.
If you have a bunch of
We're showing our
blank
age.
answers right now, and you have like 2 minutes left, just go and bubble in them, like all
Really?
C's. Just C's down the
Good to
line.
know if I ever.
Yeah,
You'll
we'll
get
get
some
New
of them
blog
wrong,
on
but
skipping
you'll get
questions
some
on the
right.
SATs coming soon to collegeexpress.com.
CollegeXpress.com.
Hey, I know a thing. So ends up on the new SAT, there is no penalty for incorrect answers. So skipping or answering a question incorrectly results in the same score.
I think one thing that we also didn't mention too is wear a watch. I'm sure there's going to be a clock in the room too.
A regular watch, maybe not
Yeah,
like
right,
an
yeah,
Apple
yeah.
Watch.
That's, yeah,
Yeah.
very true. So yeah, just have something that you're able to keep track of time. Usually for each section, they're going to tell you exactly how much time you have in that section. So be mindful of where you are, what time it is, and how much time you have left, so that you're able to, again, see what questions you're struggling with, skip them, come back. You're like, okay, well, I still have 10, 20 minutes to go back and fill out the ones that I didn't have. You'll make yourself feel a lot more comfortable than sitting there dwelling on it, and then all of a sudden, time's over and you got nothing left.
Right.
Should we maybe do like the reading passages first, since those will probably take a little bit longer. That way you can like go back to the multiple choice ones, and those probably won't take as long. I think people recommend usually spending about like a minute on a question, because if you're spending like 5 minutes, that adds up so quickly. So maybe like a minute on a question, and then the multiple choice probably wouldn't even take a minute. Like some of them, you could probably crank those out pretty quickly, and that time will help you with the reading passages. Because I'm a slow reader, so it takes me like 5 minutes to read one passage.
I think that was one of my biggest detriments the first time I took the SAT was reading the passage. I was like, oh, it's going to be a lot easier if I just skim it. And I skim it, and then I read the question and be like, I got to go back and read
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
read the
Spend more
question
time.
first,
Yeah,
and then go back
very
and read the
detailed read
passage.
it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good
You
point
know what
too.
you're
Yeah,
looking
that's a
for.
good point.
Yeah.
So I think those things all definitely help. Practice test, definitely number one.
Yeah.
You really need to get in there and see where you're going to be spending the most time, and then you can focus your study that way. Also, it just gives you a better groundwork of, okay, this is how long it took me. And then as you take another one, okay, I've gotten better. It's with anything in life. The more you do it, the more practice you get, the easier things become.
Mm-hmm.
I think also with time, just make sure you're not like trying to speed through questions because you're worried about running out of time. So like you're done in an hour and everyone's still on page 1. So you know, definitely pace yourself, but like have that, like each question have an idea of like how long have I been spending on this question.
Yeah.
Like think about it that way.
Right. All right, question 2. The first part of this 2-part question comes from Emma_KREIS, and she asks, what is the best way to study for the ACT math portion with no idea about Trig or Calc? Because she never took it. Well,
Great question.
let me tell you, Emma, neither did I. And I managed just fine, because honestly, both the SAT and ACT don't really get in the weeds with trigonometry or calculus. It sticks to mostly algebra and geometry, and stays away from the advanced level math, which is good because a lot of us, like myself, are not great with numbers, not great with math. So I was never in those advanced classes, and I actually never had to take them in college either. But it, basically the extent of my math education in college was statistics, required statistics courses, and outside of that, no knowledge. So
Yeah, I'm going to say my only required course in college was algebra,
Mhm.
and I tested out of it because it was one of those things. But
Right.
yeah, it's not, as Abby just mentioned, it's more focused on algebra and geometry.
Mhm.
I think with algebra, a lot of the time you can work through the problems, but with geometry, you really need to know all the theorems. So I think if you're going to spend the time, that's where you should spend it. Because, yeah, geometry and I do not get along. But I love algebra.
Me and
I love it,
geometry.
I feel like if you're in a situation where you have to take, like, answer questions for Trig and Calc you've never taken the class, but you know they're going to be on the test, like, maybe find a tutor. So there's a lot of tutors for these tests. and have them just kind of like go over the basics of it for you, just so you're not going into it knowing nothing. Also, I think these kind of tests allow you to bring a calculator in, specifically a graphing calculator.
I think the SAT does, the ACT doesn't, right?
I think the ACT
I wrote it
does.
down.
No.
SAT allows most graphic calculators.
Yeah, you might have to check the requirements.
Calc.
But I brought mine to the SAT. I'm pretty sure you can to the ACT.
Yeah.
And I put the formulas into my calculator.
Boom.
So
I didn't know how to do that. But
I mean, honestly though, about the tutor aspect, you really, unless math is your biggest struggling point, I didn't personally have a tutor, because again, if these are standardized tests, and your teachers in high school are knowledgeable about the contents of the test and will be consistently preparing you for the content of the test. So a tutor is really more of it's absolutely a useful tool, but your teachers are,
I think
or
it's just
they
if you're like really worried about
Right.
doing badly.
Definitely.
on it.
But I
Or
think in
you wanna
terms of the
score
Trig and Calc,
Really?
high.
but for Trig and Calc, you don't need to hire a tutor specifically for trigonometry and calculus, because you won't need to know much, if any, on standardized tests like that, because it's not standard curriculum for all high school students.
Yeah.
Luckily, because I
The-
wouldn't have done very well.
Benefit, if you are taking those courses, they will help you though. Whereas math kind of slowly builds upon itself as you get further and further up. So if you are in those courses, I know, Emma, you're not, and you're worried about that. Don't be worried. If you are in them, pat yourself on the back. You get a nice
You
hand
smart.
up. Yeah, exactly. So that's a good thing to have in your back pocket.
Yeah. Second part of this question comes from Jasmine_Ari_G. And they ask if there is any tips we have just in general for the math section. I mean, honestly, it really depends on how strong you feel your skill set is in the math department. And again, I was not a numbers-oriented gal. I'm still not. So math was very difficult for me, but I just used every resource that was available to me. So the test prep books, online resources, CollegeXpress.com. We can't teach you math. We can try, but
the calculator.
yeah, calculators are
Biggest
good.
thing, don't forget that.
Don't forget your calculator.
Yeah.
That is a good
don't,
tip.
if you forget your calculator, you can't use your phone.
Can't use your phone.
So I think another thing to keep in mind too is if you're nervous about the math section, and we did bring it up in the last topic, but being able to skip around, and if you're not comfortable with the question, don't dwell on it.
Yeah.
Skip right past it. And also if you solve an equation and you feel like, mark it and take the time to go back and double check your work there, because if your gut's telling you that feels weird, it's probably weird, probably incorrect. So
Yeah.
take the time to go back and scope it out.
And for any multiple choice math questions, just plug in the answers and see which one works. It's probably quicker than trying to do it without knowing the answers. So.
yeah, true. At multiple choice, you can at least like cross off the ones you know aren't right, or the ones that don't. Maybe you can if you don't know math that well. You just can't figure out which one's completely wrong. But that's
if your answer
another
doesn't
one.
match any of the multiple choice
There you
answers,
go.
you got to
It's
start
probably
over.
not right.
Back to square one.
Yeah, I think
My
the math
choice.
section is definitely just a practice thing.
Yeah.
A little more I think than the English section, because like obviously you need to study up on the grammar and what else is the English section? Vocab.
Yeah.
But I think with math it's like a lot of practice. If you just get used to answering those questions and knowing the formulas, you should be fine.
Yeah, I think everything that we said, and going to Mackenzie's point, is very smart about putting the formulas. You can actually write like anything you want in a calculator.
Yeah.
So if there are certain things that you struggle at, make notes, or even if it's just how to do whatever the formula is, you can manually write it in and say, like, step 1, this is what happens. Step 2, I did that a lot in chemistry in high school, because chemistry tends to have math problems as well, and I always forgot the conversions and things along that nature. So having all those as a dictionary in there, because real life you're going to be able to look that up.
because
Yeah.
you're allowed to bring your
Yeah,
But if
exactly.
you don't have a graphing calculator, I think also when you go into the test, like, memorize the formulas as best you can, and then the first thing you do when you open up
Right.
the test booklet is write down all the formulas you can remember, so you have it as a reference as you go.
Ravioli, ravioli, give me the formuloli.
That's what Abby said to her neighbors as she was taking the test.
What?
It's from
You don't know
SpongeBob.
Yeah.
From SpongeBob.
Did you not watch? Are you one of those kids that didn't watch
I
SpongeBob as a
watched
kid?
SpongeBob. But I'm
SpongeBob was made for
also
adults, actually.
A little bit older, so I haven't seen the new stuff. Is that an older one?
The new stuff isn't even good.
I'll show you. I'll show you.
Yeah.
Really
Just
showing
send
your
Tyler
age,
a bunch
old
of
man.
SpongeBob videos.
Yes,
and
please
gifs.
link
But
everything in the
SpongeBob was
comments.
absolutely made for adults. I'm pretty sure
Oh, yeah.
it was like
Oh,
originally
okay.
pitched to Adult Swim, and Adult Swim was like, no.
There are a lot of jokes
No.
in SpongeBob that you wouldn't get if you were a kid, but like
Yeah.
when you're older, you're like, ah.
Yeah, it all makes sense. Anyways.
All right, ravioli.
All right, moving on to question 3. Did any of you use services or tutors to help you prepare for the SAT? If so, what services? So I remember when I was studying for the SAT, I had like the big books,
Yes.
the SAT prep books, and
All my memories.
my dad would sit me down in his office, and for like a couple hours at a time, I would just go through the books, just study all the information,
Yeah.
and then do like the little practice tests at the end of each section. So it helped, I guess. You know, I did pretty well on my SATs, I think. There are easier ways now.
Yeah.
So parents shouldn't lock their kids
Well,
in the room and make them
To
study.
be
I mean,
fair, you can still buy those bad boys on Amazon.
oh, I have like 5 of them
I
on my
look-
desk. If you want one.
Oh. Alright, put your address in the
Yeah.
comments below. Mackenzie's gonna send you an SAT prep.
For free. I don't want them.
Definitely take practice tests though. I think College Board has like a full length practice test you can take online if your school doesn't offer them. So
They
Yeah,
do.
yeah, they definitely do, and they are the people that make the SAT, so what better place to take a practice than from the source itself?
Yeah. I mean, I used the free resources that were available to me. I didn't feel the need to have my parents pay for a tutor or extra classes, and I also was overwhelmed with my schoolwork, so I just didn't feel like it was worth my time, and I ended up doing well. So it really depends. I know that some of us test well and some of us test poorly, and that doesn't say anything about your intelligence or your capabilities academically. It just means that you retain and regurgitate information differently, essentially.
And I think you kind of know what
Yeah.
kind of test taker you are.
Definitely.
So if you know you kind of struggle. I struggled at test taking. Like, I had really good grades, but when it came to taking tests, I don't know, it was like the pressure of taking the test.
Yeah,
I get
definitely.
nervous.
It's a lot of anxiety.
So I think, like, for kids like me, maybe spend like a few months before you take the test practicing a bit more. And it sucks that you have to spend more time doing that, but I think just like preparing yourself for that
Yeah.
test, practicing with the full length practice test,
Mhm.
kind of helps with like the anxiety of taking it, and maybe makes you less nervous for it.
Yeah, definitely. Having the knowledge of what it's gonna look like, I think relieves a lot of that anxiety
Mhm.
right off the bat.
Yeah.
And also, with Anthony talking about those big books, I totally did those too. But another thing that I used all the time was flashcards. And I know flashcards are kind of old school. They still definitely work. And you can also get an app and just make flashcards on your
Definitely,
phone
yeah.
and just have them come up. So I think,
SAT word game.
yeah, SAT word game on CollegeXpress.com is basically a flashcard. So we'll link that in the description below. Something that we created that's a lot of fun. It works on your phone. Everything's cool. You get scored. You get little achievements as you go up, and you can share it out with your friends. That's a great asset to have. But when it comes down to just flashcards in general, it could be math problems. It could be SAT, vocab. It could be any one of those things. Make the flashcards, especially with things that you struggle with. And again, as Abby said, everybody learns differently. So if flashcards aren't your thing, don't use them.
Mhm.
Find what works well for you when you study and how to.
There
best-
are a lot of apps nowadays too for preparing. You could download them and they send you like a question a day or something like that, and you could just do it like couple months beforehand, every day, just answering a question.
There's a lot of apps that are really
Yeah.
helpful. I mean, when I was in high school, and some of us in this room were in high school, there were no smartphones, so we didn't really have that option.
Nokia brick, baby.
Yep, that's right. So that wasn't an option, but for you guys it is now, which is wonderful. I even have, I mean, I'm 29 years old, I have a vocabulary app on my phone. Because it's good to keep your vocabulary strong, and I'm a writer. I have to use fun words sometimes. But yeah, I mean, find the apps that work for you, whether it's, you know, actual vocab type quizzing, or whether it's just task management and organization, just to hold yourself accountable, keep yourself on a schedule. And again, I mean, I think we keep saying about the practice test how important that is. So regardless of if you do end up getting a tutor, make sure you're putting the time aside to study for the practice test, and then treat the practice test like the real deal. So, you know, and you can make a kind of a reward system for yourself as well. You know, every time you study, give yourself not only a pat on the back because you're working really hard, but, you know, set up yourself a little reinforcement schedule so that you can have, you know, something that you don't typically have, or just something that's a nice treat for you. And on the day that you do your practice test, you know, make a plan to go get ice cream after, or, you know, whatever it may be that's gonna make your day a good day after that. And then that will help alleviate the stress on the actual day of the test, knowing that you sat through that practice test, you got through it, you're still alive and well, you can do it again, and then, you know, you'll just move on with your life after that. So I think that'll help take a little pressure off your shoulders.
Definitely.
My siblings are in high school right now, and they say they get told from their counselors and parents to use Kane Academy.
Yeah, I have the
You know
depth
that?
of it.
Yeah. I think they provide a lot of practice questions too, and I think they have tutors,
They do.
or online tutors. No.
That's kind of similar to Magoosh too, which is one of our older partners, and especially for SAT vocab, they're huge on that. So there's, as we've mentioned, a whole assortment of different
Jealous they have all these resources.
tools,
Like we
yeah.
have the book.
we had the big book, yeah, as
Yeah.
Abby mentioned when she's saying reward yourself at the end. I was like, burn that book at the end. It's done, it's over.
Make good
Burn
kindling
that.
right
Or
there.
sell it for cash.
I used to get like little candies, like M&Ms or Skittles, if I got like, you know, enough questions right, or finished enough questions in a certain amount of time. I get like 5 Skittles.
Stay motivated.
Question the Skittles ratio. I like it.
You have to have, you know, self-control for that, though. If they're sitting right there.
Doesn't get the question right.
If you're
You
just
have to
eating the
regulate.
Skittles
Yeah.
instead of doing the questions, you're
Yeah.
doing it wrong.
Yeah.
I would start making like a design out of the Skittles, because I have short attention span.
Oh, the different colors. Yeah, I think, so one question that I think only Abby answered, did you guys have tutors at all?
I didn't.
I did. I don't remember if it was for the SATs or not. I think it was. It was because I redid the SATs once to
Yeah.
try to improve my math score, and I did go to a tutor, and you know it helped. But I don't know, math was never really my strong subject to begin with, so I didn't really do that much better the second time. So I don't know. It's hit or miss.
I had my older brother, but he didn't do good on the SATs, so I probably shouldn't have used him as a resource. No.
That's, yeah, my sister is fantastic for using your siblings as a resource if they're older, or if they're knowledgeable in whatever area. My sister's great for anything English related. So whenever I write a paper, even to this day, if I'm like, I have an important document that I want, I'm like, Megan, what are you doing? Take you out to dinner, like, take a look at this. But, use those different resources that you have. We didn't have an official tutor. I went to a private school, and we had SAT prep program, and going through all of that stuff. I'm sure like a lot of high schools do that too.
I did for sure.
Yeah, they really do drill you right down, and you just keep going over and over things. So it is basically like the practice exam, but you're with teachers, and so you have more of a, not motivation, but you have to answer to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have the self-control with the Skittles or the M&Ms, there's somebody waiting and saying, hey, why didn't this happen?
It's not just your parents telling you to go study.
Right, yeah.
So I never did that
Exactly.
when they told me to.
Yeah, then you just go to your room, pull out your phone.
Yeah.
not actually do it.
Sit there next to the book. Question 4. If I don't do well on the SAT, should I keep retaking it until I get the score I want? I think if you don't do well on the SAT the first time, there's no harm in retaking it again, especially if you're willing to put in more work the second time around to do the practice test, maybe reach out to a few people to get some help, maybe figuring out what you did, like looking back at the results of your first SAT and looking at where you didn't do as well, going back and fixing those areas. But if you're just going to take the SAT again and not do anything to help your score, I don't think it's going to help raise your score the second time around. Like, you're not doing anything different. So you're just kind of wasting time and money.
To counteract that point, if you
How
want to,
dare you.
I know. I think we talked a lot about test prep, and that's great. It's a great resource, and you should definitely do it, like, no doubt about that. But when you actually take the test, you get into, okay, this is the test. I'm in this room, I'm taking this test, this is real time, big leagues. So your anxiety goes right up. So the first time you do it is going to be nerve-wracking. So I think the only benefit if you don't do any of the extra stuff, which you should definitely do, without a doubt, is you have the ease of mind that, yes, I've been here before, I know the routine, I know what's going to happen. So there is a little bit of a difference in that regard, especially if you have a really high anxiety for test taking. So
Yeah.
just,
I think it really it depends. There are so many factors. It depends first and foremost how poorly you did on your first go. It's also worth mentioning that a lot of schools these days are looking at their applicants more holistically rather than just certain elements like just their grade point average, just their test score. So if you are a strong student with lots of extracurricular activities or, one thing that you're really a shining star at and you just happen to not test well, that's not going to make or break your college admission
some
chances.
colleges don't even require SAT or
Right.
ACT anymore.
Yeah,
so
there are,
it's a good
test optional schools now. And again, there's just more of a leaning towards a holistic look at their applicants. But then again, if you really feel that your test score doesn't reflect your skill as a student or your academic level, then yeah, feel free to retake the test. But like Mackenzie said, put in the work so that you're better prepared this time. Like Tyler said, make sure that you're managing your expectations of yourself, keep your stress low, eat your Wheaties that day, get a good night's sleep, all that. But I think just most importantly, just consider all the factors and even talk to some admission counselors, talk to your high school counselor, talk about, how important is my test score? Is my test score in, my application for this school versus this school? There's just so many factors to consider.
I think that's a huge point is we talked about schools that don't require it, schools that do require it. What is the average SAT, ACT? If you have a school that you have in mind that is looking specifically for that, it doesn't come right down to like, oh, they didn't hit that, we're out. But if you want to get closer to that and you have that goal in mind, that's a good goal to have, and you should work towards that and try to retake it with that mindset. So I think, it's not a end-all be-all, but it is important that...
And schools are smart. Like, if they see you have straight A's and then you just kind of did average on the SAT, I think they're going to be like, okay, they only took it like once. Maybe they don't test well. Like, maybe we won't take this into consideration as much, or maybe, I don't know. I think they will kind of like consider your actual grades over the SAT a little bit and like notice those differences.
Yeah, I think big things are the confidence level is getting boosted up, so that gives you more of a feeling of being able to know what's coming and where to go. Also, because you've taken it before, now, we mentioned the college board test, the practice test. That's a great start. Again, this is the actual test that you just took, so you feel, okay, these are the questions they're going to ask, right? These are the certain things they're going to be having. So I think that's a great benefit, and you learn from your earlier mistakes. So okay, I didn't score so well on the math, or I didn't score so well on the grammar, and now you know exactly where you need to put all your focus.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say, because they take what you give them. So if you did really well in math and English on the first one and didn't do good in the other sections, you can focus more on those when you're studying for your next try. And then if those are higher, you can just send, these two from the first test, these two from the second test, and those are the scores they'll take.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like if you do overall worse on the second one, that's gonna affect you in any way. But that being said, they do only offer the tests on limited numbers of days, and it's $50 a pop, so
That's a big
don't
thing,
overdo
yeah.
it.
Yeah, time and money.
Yeah, time, money,
Consideration.
and anxiety.
Yeah, I think another vote for me for not retaking it is, another factor to consider is, are you declaring your major on your college applications? Because I know with my SAT scores, I did much better with the writing and reading, because that's where my strengths lie, and I was applying as an English journalism major to schools. So of course that helped my case, and it's not as important for a writer or an English journalism major to be very skilled in math. Not that it's not important to be well-rounded as a student and a person, but it's worth thinking about if you are declaring your major. Of course, if you're applying to be an accountant or to study accounting and you did absolutely horribly on the math section, there might be some questions. But if you're like me and you have your skill set lies one place and not the other, but that's what you choose to study, that's helpful for your case as well.
And most people are you can clearly see the strengths either in math or reading and writing. I think most of my friends were like, okay, I did really well in English, really bad in math. I had maybe 2 friends who were like, I scored really high in all the sections.
Yeah.
So
And
don't
good on you.
put yourself down for that.
Millionaires now.
Yeah.
Not saying that you should take a low score, but
Yeah.
I think also to bring it back to test prep and studying and everything is once you decide that you are going to retake the test, and if you just finished the test, don't put off studying again.
Mm-hmm.
Study right off the bat, and don't make it like a hardcore grind session on, okay, I gotta get through all this stuff. Pick a date that's further out, it gives you enough time to prep for it, and take your time, be slow about it, and very methodical. Know what you did wrong again, take the time to practice that, and because it's so fresh in your mind and it's constantly coming and going, is going to make it a lot easier when you go to take that next exam, because you're fresh on it instead of, oh, I didn't know what to expect, and then you take the first exam and, okay, that went horrible, so how do I improve on it? If you were to just cold turkey it and say, okay, the next exam's in 2 months or whenever it is, and then you go into it, it's going to be almost the same experience again. Just and don't cram. Give yourself the time. Again, get plenty of sleep right beforehand and make sure that you are rested, because it does help big time.
I think also preparing, it doesn't have to be 3 months out you're studying 2 to 3 hours a day. I think that's a lot to put on yourself, especially with the schoolwork on top. Like Abby's saying, she was struggling finding time to study for the SAT as well. So just doing small things each day, maybe a few vocab words, just a few math problems each day for 2 to 3 months.
Yeah.
You'll get in just the idea of how the questions are asked. I think that was also a big thing people told me after I took the SAT is you have to look at the wording, because they don't trick you, but the way the SAT writes stuff, you have to focus on how they're asking the question.
Yeah.
Most tests, but
I think on the subject of not studying too much, which is something we've brought up a couple of times, if you're interested, it's worth looking into about how our brains work and how studying works. In particular with certain subjects, there's a lot of studies out there on learning languages and things like that, but there is some data out there about how much we can reasonably study, how long we can reasonably study, and how much information we can reasonably retain. It was a common mistake that a lot of kids around me were making. They just would sit down and study for hours and hours and hours, and it's just not effective. It's much better to break it down into smaller sessions over time rather than cramming. Cramming is just not your friend.
Especially if you're just reading for like 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
not doing
it's like
anything.
if you were to binge eat something and then like you're just like, all right, I got this whole thing.
Yeah.
Then you're just gonna vomit all over the place.
Oh
And the same applies for cramming for your knowledge because
I
when
don't
you get
like
to
this
the,
analogy.
Hold on, that's a great analogy. When you get to the test, you've crammed all that information in your brain and it just spills out and you don't really know what's
Or
what.
if it up on the test.
And then you're cleaning up vomit
Great
during the
analogy.
SATs, and that's just
Well,
a waste
not
of
actual
time.
vomit, but
Sounded like actual
I'm sure
vomit.
somebody has vomit.
Knowledge vomit.
Knowledge
Knowledge
vomit.
vomit.
But yeah, I mean, it's impossible to retain, that much information when you're just trying to cram it, and it's just not effective. So don't even bother.
yeah. And one thing we did not bring up is find a study group. Everybody in your friend group is going to be around the same time that you're taking the exam, especially in your school, and figure out when they're taking their exam, what strengths they have, what weaknesses they have. Try to pair up with somebody that has a strength that's your weakness and use them to your advantage, so when you're studying you can help them on something and they can help you on something. And again, the flashcards, having somebody else there is just beneficial because you're not just flipping it on yourself.
That is correct.
And you're like, oh, what was this one again? I do that.
Nailed it. 5 skittles, baby. So yeah, I think all those things definitely add up and will help you on your second test if you decide to take your second test. So there are pros and cons, but for the most part, it's not going to hurt you if you take the second time, but it is going to cost you time, money, anxiety. So
All the things.
keep that into consideration. All right, so that was our CollegeXpress podcast, all about test prep, SAT, ACT, and any test that you might have in your future. We hope you enjoyed that, and if you did, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for all things college, and follow us on all social media just to keep up to date with what is going on in the CollegeXpress community.
CollegeXpress.com.
CollegeXpress.com. If you didn't already know, this podcast released at the very first week of every single month, and we release a question Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. On Friday, the whole thing gets released as a gigantic podcast for your viewing pleasure. So we will see you next month. Thank you.
Bye.
See you.